Warning, this is not a podcast for those who have got it together. We are men seeking answers to the questions that have plagued our mind. Can we be undefeated?
Okay, welcome to the podcast. This is Positively Undefeated. I'm Burl. I'm here with Emily. How are you?
I'm well.
Well, great. Thank you for being on. I was very interested in, one of the things that we try to do is on the podcast is really just discuss things that help people mental health wise, their health in general, and also well-being and happiness. And so when I kind of heard about some of the stuff you were doing, I was interested in it. And really, I want to some people, it may sound like mystical or strange. And so if you don't mind, kind of explain, you just opened an office here in Elk City, and I'm just curious for the listeners to just try to explain what you're doing and the goal behind it and kind of the process.
Sure. I started my practice based on my own experience and my own healing.
Yeah.
And the methods that I went about for a decade learning that were effective. And so in my practice, I teach others biofield therapies, which is kind of a foreign word.
Okay.
Our energy system, our nervous system. I help people calm their nervous system, essentially. And so biofield therapies is kind of an umbrella term for techniques that actually change our whole state of being, our whole frequency. They bring us to a state of calm and center. So a technique that people might be familiar with is the emotional freedom technique or tapping. And that's great for trauma work, trauma healing, belief work. Also a practice called Reiki. So Reiki is a Japanese healing technique. And the practice includes prayer beforehand. And essentially, the practitioner channels a state of frequency and essence of love, a state of being of love through them to the other person. So we lay our hands on vital organs of the body from head to toe. And during this process, depending on your practitioner and their faith, they will be in prayer and they will be in a state of love. So essentially, somebody is placing their hands on you who is in a state of sending love to you, compassion for you. And in my practice, the Holy Spirit is involved.
So what you said that this kind of from your experience and something that helped you. Tell us kind of like how you found this and what made you pursue this, and I'm real curious about that.
Yeah. So I got a fun diagnosis of bipolar 1 disorder in my younger 20s, and I'd actually been experiencing the symptoms in my teenage years. And for those who aren't familiar with bipolar 1 disorder, it is now called, I guess, it used to be called manic depressive. So states of extreme energy, states of extreme lows, depression, suicidal depression, compulsive behaviors, complete dysregulation of emotions. It's literally hell, internally. And so I received this diagnosis. I was living here in Western Oklahoma. I grew up here in Western Oklahoma, in Burns Flat. And the support post the diagnosis was pretty depressing in this area. I was told by a psychiatrist, hey, you're going to have to live with this. The statistics all show, early death is the prognosis, whether that be a stroke, a heart attack from all the stress you're under, whether that be by your own hands from suicide. So I didn't have a lot of hope.
Yeah.
It was try this medication, try that medication. The side effects from the medications left me debilitated. I couldn't even do, my work. I couldn't make a living. So I sought something more. I had to seek something more. I happened to meet a couple of women in Weatherford here in Oklahoma who were teaching Reiki. And these two women were also, I would call Christian mystics. I would call that they were practitioners of working in the spirits. And so when I was trained in this Reiki, I first was trained to help myself. I thought, boy, this sounds peace. We're going to connect with love, with peace and joy. These things are so foreign to me right now.
Yeah.
And so I stumbled across this class. I thought, hey, I'll give it a try. And that's the day that I did metaphysically realize that God was more than just stories, more than just this idea. I got to experience the living spirit of God directly through hands being laid on me in prayer. Now, Reiki in itself is very general, very vague. You could have a Wiccan practitioner who is a Reiki practitioner. You can have a Buddhist practitioner. You could have a pagan practitioner. You can have someone who plays with witchcraft as a practitioner. So Reiki in itself, to me, is not the powerful practice, the name Reiki. What was powerful to me was having hands laid on me and the prayer spoken, which was just the Lord's Prayer. Not just the Lord's Prayer. There's so much packed into that prayer.
Right. But the basics of that.
The basis, that state of being with God. And so when I experienced the essence of love, peace, and even joy, I was blown away. My life changed after that. I had to get my hands on as many people as possible, whether they had a knee ache, whether they had a headache, whether they had mental pain, sadness, suffering. It's been my mission since then to share and show the power of prayer and laying hands on people. So that's just one faucet of how I came to this practice.
Well, one of the reasons I'm interested in it, because I'm very anti, and I got to carefully say this, but I'm very anti-drug and medication.
Yeah.
I know that there is a need for medication and there's a place for it, but also, in fact, last night I was talking to a friend and we recorded a podcast and we were talking about that there's only 2 countries in the world that allow pharmaceutical advertisements, and that's one of them is the United States. And it's really amazing how much, like, really the number of commercials on TV about pharmaceuticals, and then also how much of that influences our media and news and all those things. But more astounding is when you look at the side effects. And what I was saying is that they don't even hide the side effects anymore. They used to say it really fast whenever they got to the side effect part. And now they're actually saying it slow, and there's tons of side effects. And so it's scary to me, that there's so many side effects to these medications. And what I've always been interested in is that, like, dealing with mental health, whether you're talking about depression, for example, or maybe you're grieving, it's like ways to deal with that are outside medication. You know what I mean? And I think that like that. Those things have always interested me, where you can take the medication, and yes, sometimes that's needed, but also finding healing in other things. Like we're talking about going backpacking and being out in the wilderness and being out in the, seeing the stars and seeing the sunrise and seeing the sunset, and those things can have a profound impact on you mentally and physically. And so that's kind of why I wanted to have you on here, because I'm interested in those other things.
Yeah.
I think that I think that it's almost like you need like an ammunition, or like a whole host of things sometimes to deal with the different things that are going on. Yes, medication may be part of that, but also prayer is definitely part of that. Meditation has been proven to work. It doesn't matter like you said, it doesn't matter necessarily whether you're talking about this religion or this denomination. Prayer has been very scientifically proven to work and to have an impact on people. And so that's what interests me. Is it just kind of praying and laying on hands, this part of it, or is there more to that?
There's so much more to it. So in my journey, in my 10-year sabbatical of leaving this area, Elk City specifically, and kind of moving more east, I ended up in Oklahoma City, and I lived there for a year, specifically just because there is a wonderful nonprofit, North Care, it's called, in Oklahoma City. I went there to learn the dialectical behavioral therapy, to learn the cognitive behavioral therapy. What I learned was that essentially I had PTSD. I didn't know that. Untreated trauma surely left to a bipolar diagnosis. I learned nutrition. I learned how important, your nutrition is for, how important your brain health is, right? Mental health is a multifaceted approach. So it's a lifestyle change. I learned that I literally had to make complete lifestyle changes in all areas of my life. I realized I was taught to be a consumer and a producer in society, but what I was consuming and producing was unfruitful. It led to illness. It just doesn't work. So I became a more mindful producer and consumer. I became mindful of what I consumed. I went on a detox, a complete detox, and then started reintroducing things. And I was very selective on everything I listened to, everything I ate. But definitely, the medications did nothing for me but create side effects and more problems.
Right.
My belief system, when I learned that our belief systems don't have to be fixed, they're not set in stone. That was huge. That was the key that unlocked the door to potential to heal. Oh, I could change my belief, right? I believe that I'm not worthy. I believe all these negative things. I believe that I'm a monster. I believe that I'm broken. I believe that I'm useless. I believe that all these beliefs that were just so condemning for my life, I learned that I could change those beliefs. And so in our sessions and my sessions with people, we do a lot of belief work. We look at our belief systems. We could do meditation. We can do these practices, and and they train our nervous system to respond to life in a calm manner. But also, we need to assess and look at where our beliefs are, and are they helpful? Are they unhelpful? Value-based living. I started looking at my values. I trained in nonviolent communication, which is the process of empathy that Dr. Marshall Rosenberg designed and created. And in his psychology studies. And I learned empathy. I learned how to connect with my values. I learned how to recognize judgment that was going on, judgments towards myself, judgments towards other people, judgments towards institutions, just judgment in general. I learned to discern when I was in a state of judgment or empathy. And so I was able to, and I'm not perfect at it, but it's training. Every day it's training. But I have a self-care, it's almost like my manual, right? And I stuck to that manual, and I lived by that manual until it became habit, till it just runs in the background, and it's now my lifestyle. And it took time, it's been a decade, and it takes dedication, it takes discipline, and it's so worth it. It's so worth it to invest in your well-being and to put in the work. And I think that's where we're turning to pills, is because we're not putting in the work. We're not willing to put in the work that it takes to face our pain, to face our suffering, to face our spiritual defects, maybe, to face our shadow, right? And to face the enemy within ourselves. That's hard to do. To let down, to just let that pride fall and say, yeah, I'm here, and I can improve. But before I got there, I had to have hope. I had to find hope. And so I didn't give up on seeking, and I just kept seeking. And so I'm hoping that the space that I've created here is a place where people can feel comfortable with showing up just right as they are, right where they're at, and knowing that they'll be met with empathy. I've been in their shoes, maybe not their exact shoes, but we're all human beings. We've all felt and experienced the same emotions, the same mindsets, right? And we can get out of it. We can improve.
So who do you think, give me some examples of things, of somebody that could benefit from the services you provide?
Someone who feels stressed, anxious, someone, and most people probably have never experienced a deep sense of relaxation and peace. So for anyone, from someone who's just looking for just an hour to be still, to be present, and to be free of clutter in the mind, these sessions are for those people. These sessions are for people who are struggling with a mental health diagnosis as well. I'm not a licensed therapist or psychologist. I became certified in life coaching because my passion is peer support. And so I offer support to peers who have a mental health diagnosis and who feel hopeless. Those who want real change and want guidance in that. Also, for those who are experiencing spiritual crisis, a lot of people that come to me are in spiritual crisis, whatever that looks like for the person. I've had some you talk about metaphysical. I've had some pretty wild interactions with people out there, specifically people who are, in the new age it's here, right? The new age, the manifesting, the witchcraft, I am a god, I am a goddess, and, all this stuff going on. Well, I tend to draw people to me that get caught up in that and then get caught up in a sort of hell, and they're not well.
Mm-hmm.
They go into these spiritual practices because essentially they want healing.
Mm-hmm.
They want peace, but they're getting led down a path that just won't get them there. And so they come to me to find if there's even a better way, a more helpful way spiritually to practice, to find peace.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times people realize they have a fear of God. They have a disdain for God. Maybe their family members were Bible thumpers and they preached the Bible to them in a negative way, in a condemning way. But I work with a lot of people who essentially have hang-ups with God in some sort of way.
Mm-hmm.
And so in their spiritual seeking, there's a disconnect with God. There's a roadblock. And I can relate to that personally. I personally, through trauma, disconnected from God because God was a he.
Mm-hmm.
And at a time in my life, I was disgusted with men.
Mm-hmm.
Before I was aware and understood and became enlightened and all those wonderful things.
Mm-hmm.
But so I understand the hang-ups that we can develop with God and how we can become disconnected with God. And so it's a passion of mine to help people find their personal relationship with God. It is very personal. And that's where the healing truly happened for me. So I was making great strides with all these cognitive, applied psychologies.
Mm-hmm.
But when I decided I took these walks because I was in a life or death situation. Even with all the progress I had made, I knew my spirit was in trouble. My soul was troubled.
Mm-hmm.
I was not truly at peace.
All
Was functioning. Maybe I hadn't been to a mental health institution or hospital or a psych ward in a few years, but I still was not at peace.
Mm-hmm.
So I took these walks and I just hashed out my issues with God. God, why do you got to be called a he, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I started just having these personal conversations with God. And at the end of a few weeks of these long walks, I felt like there was an understanding. I had an understanding and I had peace with God.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when, and I would say almost like overnight, something shifted, something changed. I had that personal relationship with God now. God was more than just even an essence, right, that I felt flow through me.
Mm-hmm.
God was my friend. God was my parent. God was my mentor, my teacher. The way God communicated with me and got me into learning the Bible is just a whole nother story.
Mm-hmm.
But that's my passion spiritually, is for people to know God personally and to compassionately help them break through the hang-ups and barriers that have prevented them from even wanting to know God on a personal level.
Mm-hmm. It almost sounds like too much. I mean, and to somebody listening, it almost sounds like too good to be true, kind of, I mean, I 100% believe you. But I think I could understand somebody listening and say, man, am I going to get all this
right
from a session? And I, not necessarily the details, but what would a session, like the overall view of us, because people might be super intimidated to like, okay, I'm going to come in and meet with you. And so kind of what's the overall view of a session? Like what would it be like?
So the first session is, getting to know what the needs are.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of back and forth conversation. And then I'm going to have you lay on a massage table, fully clothed. It's not like massage therapy. And I'm going to lay hands and pray and just let the person experience being still. So from there, we're going to address, based on the needs, where to go from there. So the sessions vary. So they can look like just kind of some life coaching, typical questions and answers. They can look like doing tapping work. There's not one method that all sessions are not the same and they're not cookie cutter because we're also unique in our specific issues and problem areas. So depending on where the person's at and what they're struggling with, we come up with a plan, right? We're going to target this specific symptom. So we focus on one symptom at a time, and we look at all the areas that might be contributing to that unwanted belief, that symptom. It could be a belief. It could be definitely in our thinking. It could be in the choices that we're making. It could just, a lot of it's unawareness.
Right.
So we're bringing up awareness in the first sessions, essentially. We're pulling up and becoming aware of where we're actually at.
Yeah.
And from there, we're going to strategize and make a plan to get to where you want to be. It is not a quick fix. In one session, you don't come out changed. Like I said, it took me 10 years to get where I'm at, but I'm hoping that other people won't have to learn the hard way as I did, or just through trial and error and leave that, go on the whole sabbatical. Hopefully we can have that in the office space. But typically, so an example is my first client that I ever had in a life coaching combined with biofield therapies. She came in and her belief was, I don't want to live. She did not want to live. We had 7 sessions. We met once a month. Those sessions looked like, applied kinesiology. Are you aware of that? Muscle testing? So that's a process that we use.
Right.
Yeah. And so whenever we land on a belief, right, that is unhelpful, that is actually detrimental and stunting and killing our life-giving essence within us, we're going to muscle test for that, and it's going to show a weakness in that area. So then we know that this is the area, this is the belief where we need to work at. Sometimes people know when they come in consciously exactly what's wrong. Sometimes they don't. But in 7 sessions of working with this lady, she went to, I don't want to live, to, I live in joy and I know my purpose. And now my mission in life is to fulfill my purpose. And our purpose is always bigger than ourselves. It's always about how we can contribute back to society and others.
Yeah.
So, everybody's a little bit different, but she put in the work, right? She came up with her strategies that worked for her based on the awareness we found. She did them. She put in that effort. And I think that catapulted her into getting out of this.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy interesting to me. And again, why I think people actually be surprised that it interests me, but it interests me because I think that you have to have several tools in your tool belt to deal with life, to deal with depression, grieving.
Yeah.
I'm definitely a huge advocate for awareness of suicide and just understanding that, we just started a nonprofit that deals with, awareness and prevention. That's been a huge impact in my life. And I see that it wasn't one thing that brought them to that point. And so also it makes perfect sense to me that multiple things can help them get out of that spot. And sometimes it's something very immediate, that you mentioned the tapping, and people can, I know that I was maybe in that category when I heard, about tapping, and I'm like, I'm definitely can be a little bit of a, what do you call it? A little
skeptic.
Yeah, skepticism.
Me too.
And skeptic. And I understand why people are, but I also know it's like we do it naturally. Like if you have a kid with autism, you'll see, for example, they do those things to calm themselves down. And that I think it's a great example. But also you see it in ourselves. Like you may, be shaking your leg as you're sitting there. You may be rubbing your hands. You may be thumbing your fingers on the desk. All those things are natural. Your body automatically does it. And yet, if you do it more conscientiously do it, if you're in this high stress situation, or maybe you're freaking out about something, then that can be a way to self-soothe and really bring down, all the cycle, or all the physical things that are happening as you're freaking out.
The physical reacts to the mental.
Well, plus it's like blood pressure and all kinds of heart rate, et cetera. And so I think that those things are absolutely, and they're not made up. I mean, it's scientifically, again, proven.
It is so evidence-based that now the United States government approves it for military treatment for veterans, for PTSD treatment. Right. That's how much science is packed. And I love that you said we naturally do it.
Yes.
Why I am passionate about this medicine is because I believe it is God's medicine, because it is in our design. It is part of our design. Mm-hmm. So when we have a headache, where does our hand naturally go?
Yeah.
To the head. If we run into a coffee table and we bang our knee, what do we instinctively do? We put our hands on the injury, and we're either doing one of two things. We're focusing on how bad it hurts, and it's probably going to hurt worse, or we're sending some soothing relief to it, and it's probably going to alleviate it a little bit. The mind is powerful. Beliefs are powerful. So pick good ones.
Yeah. I think that your thoughts, back to that, what you're saying about our thought pattern is a huge deal.
Huge.
And part of it is like you can get down this negative thought pattern, and it's hard to break those negative thought patterns.
It is.
And it really does take practice, but it's something that we don't give enough, we don't realize that it's really the powerful negative effect that these thought patterns can have. And really, whether you're talking about addiction, or depression or any of that, once it's like if you ask somebody in the midst of their really depression episode, it's like they don't know how to get out of it. It's like I've explained it, and I've heard people explain it like it's a speeding train that you cannot get off.
You're not in control.
And in those circumstances, no matter what people say or what you think, what's going on, like it's almost impossible. And so what I've learned is that it's like stopping that train before it really starts. As you start to see some symptoms or something that's going on, it's like, I need to be more proactive. In other words, I know this is where it's going.
Yes.
So I see the triggers. I see that, that this is headed this way.
Yeah.
And so the more proactive you can be with that. And a lot of times we don't know what to do, and I think that you bring up some great points, because it's like we don't know what to do, and once you get down the speeding train and it's just out of control, there's not much to do at that point.
No, in my experience, it was a one-way ticket straight to the mental hospital every time.
Yeah.
I felt like I did not have control. And because you don't, it's almost like it's like addiction too, that I've heard, once you cross that line, it's hard to turn back. And that's why I love the tapping, is because it's like overriding your system. So sometimes when we can't get out of this pattern and the train's rolling, tapping can literally do that. It can stop the train in its tracks. It can override your entire thought processes, your state of being, and get you back into that calm parasympathetic state in your nervous system. Another thing that you said, well, I'll just leave it at that, I guess.
Well, it actually brings to mind another thing. I'm sure I'm just curious your thoughts on it, but also part of the tapping can go directly into music therapy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so, for example, I did a music therapy session one time and we just beat drums.
Oh, yeah.
And we really followed drum beats and at first I thought this is probably the most ridiculous thing I've ever done, but I actually enjoyed it so much. It's hard for me to copy it now, but you had a bunch of guys sitting around and literally we're following and copying drum beats from the instructor. But we really started, number one, to make music out of drums and rhythm and just all these things. And then it impacted me so much that I actually came home and went and bought drums because I think that there really is something there but I think it's the same concept. It's like I was blown away by, number one, kind of my own personal, I wouldn't say I had a bad attitude or a negative, but it was kind of like, this is silly. But the change towards the end, really amazed. It's almost like we all started singing, and I've been in that situation too, where a group of guys will all of a sudden start singing and you think that would never come out of this.
I love that.
But I think it's the same concept. It's like, there's an element of everything you're talking about that you have to a wall has to be broken down.
Yeah.
One of the questions I was going to ask you is that, because it would seem like that most of your clients would be women, not men.
Yeah.
And I can see why, because men are a lot more reserved when it comes to this kind of stuff.
Sure.
But I also know, and I also know from personal experience that it's as big a need for a man to break down that wall, and to be able to cross into the ability of looking at something as simple as tapping or simple as meditation, something simple as music therapy, and realize that it has this profound impact. You probably don't know this, but I actually went to treatment and really I was in there with a lot of veterans and, there's just a lot there. A lot there, and meaning that guys are, and I think it's the same. I speak more for guys just because I am one, but I think that we're so afraid to get help and we're so afraid to ask for help, but then also we're so unsure of where to go for help.
Being vulnerable is terrifying.
Yes,
it is. It's truly terrifying. And, for good reason. It is wise to be discerning about, who we're vulnerable with, especially when we're in those first stages of recovering, right? Mm-hmm. And so there is a lot of hesitation and fear, essentially. Mm-hmm. But there's so much power in vulnerability. And I am witnessing something amazing happening right now within men, and that is this no shame game in being vulnerable. Mm-hmm. And I love it. I love to see it. And it's not just for men, it's not just happening with men, women, so naturally we want to say that we're naturally vulnerable, right?
Yeah.
But in my honest thinking, I think we ourselves have been fearing being vulnerable too, right?
Yeah.
We are,
excuse me.
What's the word I'm looking for? We are distracting ourselves from being vulnerable, by being, emotional. Or mm-hmm. just being distant or numb even, or being busy, right?
Yeah.
But we often, vulnerability is so much more than I feel angry, I feel sad, I'm grieving this, I'm afraid of this. It's actually accepting that you're there. Accepting that I feel insecure, right? Accepting that I feel confused, or accepting that I feel stressed, but accepting that and expressing it just as it is. Our expressions come out in all ways but vulnerable. Our expressions come out in judgments, mostly condemning ourselves, criticisms.
Yeah.
And it's toxic, not just for men, for women, for all of us as humanity. To not just be okay with not being okay.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
You don't have to be the hero. You don't have to be the savior. You don't have to live up to this expectation of what a man is, or this expectation of what a woman is, or any of these labels and diagnoses. We need to know that we're allowed to just be where we're at, okay or not okay, and feel comfortable with that. I think that's my personal definition of being vulnerable.
Yeah, I think, that vulnerability has become a big deal in my life. And I think it is the key to a lot of things. I think that when I say a lot of things, to health and to healing and your spiritual growth and personal growth, I think that vulnerability opens the door. And another way to say the vulnerability is basically being willing to get help, ask for help, to be willing to be honest about,
to reach out
to what's going on in your life. And this just by, you were talking about bipolar or mental health or suicide, there's a huge stigma there. Like people are afraid to reach out for help if they're feeling suicidal because they're afraid they're going to get locked in a padded room and thrown away the key and they'll never come out again. They worry about that. And some of that stuff is real, some of it is real.
Yeah.
And so part of it creates this environment where we're very scared to be honest about what's going on. But also it's like, I think that what I've realized recently is the help is not necessarily where we thought it would be either. So we've been taught that these are the places, fill in the blank, where you can get help. And believe it or not, we try those things and we don't trust them.
That's right.
Because we don't see really they're not being trustworthy.
Right.
And part of that is like, for example, people act differently in different situations. So they don't see this continuity of like, this person is a very genuine person who I can trust. So we have a tendency to not trust people. And I'll give an example. I've been talking about it a lot lately, and it makes people cringe, but a lot of, when you're talking about spirituality, we're taught that we can go to the church and we can get help in that building with those people who are a pastor or whatever. And we've learned to not trust that. We've learned that is not a safe place. And it's unfortunate. And again, I'm not talking about every church or every organization, but I'm saying we have learned as a society, as Christians too, especially, that the church is not a safe place. And people, can question that, but it's just a proven fact. We have got to that point where the last place you're going to go and to get help or to get guidance is the church, because we just flat do not trust it.
Sure. I had an experience 2 summers ago. 2 summers ago, I was driving and I get this phone call from Pennsylvania, and I just think it's a telemarketer. And I answer I answer the phone call, and it's a distraught young woman on the phone, and she's having a spiritual crisis. She's seeing things that psychiatrists have diagnosed her as a schizophrenic. She's seeing these demonic entities. She's really suffering. She's suicidal. She tells me, I went to the Catholic church, the Diocese, Pennsylvania. I went to the church. She said, I was being attacked spiritually. She told me she went to the church. Some priests were there. She got on her knees. She put her forehead to the floor, and the priest began to pray over her. Mm-hmm. She said as soon as they started praying, her body flew backwards. Her shoulders were now touching the ground. And she said she saw this black stuff leaving her body. Mm-hmm. She said the priests immediately stopped praying, and they went and they called the cops to come get her. Mm-hmm. She started to levitate, mm-hmm. and they got scared, mm-hmm. and they called the cops. She went to a mental institution again. So she called me up, and she's telling me these things. I said, how did you get my number? She said, well, a person I know was in Lawton working. They were at a bar talking to somebody about what I was experiencing, and somebody had your card and gave it to him. Mm-hmm. So we prayed. I prayed for her. I prayed a prayer of exorcism. Mm-hmm. In the name of Jesus Christ. She felt it leave her just like that. Mm-hmm. She felt at peace. She is now doing very well, and she is speaking about her testimony and spreading awareness in Pennsylvania about her relationship with Christ and with God, and mm-hmm. she's doing great. But there's a lot of fear in the church. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of fear that it's preventing members of the church from doing our duty. Mm-hmm. And that is to connect with others in a complete state of love and trust in God and peace with God. Mm-hmm. Fear is shutting people out. You know, I've always dreamed of that church. I've always needed that church that you can walk into, like you see in the movies, right? Here's a church, the doors are open, you can walk into it. Mm-hmm. And I know times are different now and doors are locked. That in itself, you know, is very sad. I understand the fear that people are operating from, though. But you're right. The churches are not the trusting place. They're part of, you know, a hang up. And like you said, not all the churches. I know mm-hmm. so many good churches doing so many good works. But also the state of Oklahoma, the mental health, the Department of Mental Health, it's doing better, but it still has such a long way to go. Mm-hmm. I was in a state facility, and there was another person's blood in the bathroom that I used in my personal room. They just feed you full of drugs, and you know, when you're zombied enough, you're pretty cathartic. You know, they'll let you out. You're not a threat. You're just too drugged up to do anything, and so it's not helpful. I was offered a job to work with the Department of Mental Health before I came down here. And I thought about it, and like most things in the Western world, they're trying to separate things, right? We're just going to focus on the mental. We're just going to focus on the spiritual. Everything's so compartmentalized, right? We need more people We need more people out. We need more life coaches. We need more, excuse me, Christian-based life coaches out there.
Mm-hmm.
People who aren't working in the mental health to diagnose. Because diagnosing to me is disconnecting. It's totally.
I actually agree with you. Diagnosis deals with money. That's the bottom line.
That's it.
I was in healthcare. I've been in healthcare for 24 years. There's one reason for diagnosis, and that's to get paid.
That's right.
And it's a number. A diagnosis leads to a number. A number leads to a payment code, and that leads to payment.
Right.
And so when you are a very payment driven, money driven thing, it disconnects between it becomes impersonal. It's not personal.
And I'm glad that you brought that up because
It's just facts.
Yes,
that's true. I mean, I being in healthcare, that's the way it works. You're not going to get paid unless you have a diagnosis.
That's right.
You're not going to, I was told one time by a counselor that I have personality disorder. Well, we'll just call it personality disorder so we can bill your insurance and.
Boom, there you go.
And I mean, I think everybody has a personality disorder.
And there's your complex I just gave you.
Yeah. So, but, I think that here's the thing. I think that really, if you kind of go back full circle with this whole idea, is that I think that we got to be careful being very, I've used this word a lot, being very inclusive, meaning that there's only one way to get help.
Right.
There's only one way God works in your life, or you've got to believe this one way. If you don't believe this, and I think that God is a lot bigger than that. And I think that it's like even like a certain Christian church they're so hung up on this is how you come to Jesus, or this is how you come to God. But the problem is that you're alienating a big group of people who maybe they just need to know that there is a God, and maybe they just need to know that somebody cares, and maybe that somebody actually is in charge around here, and that somebody did create the stars and the heavens. And it's almost, another word that I've used a lot lately, and that's, I can't even think now, but basically the idea is that we want more and more knowledge, and we think that if we have all the knowledge, then we can, then we'll have the answer. But maybe it's just a lot broader than that. Maybe it's like, it's not just medicine that's going to help me, or therapy like we're used to, or a psychologist like we're used to. I mean, maybe actually getting physically active and going backpacking, or maybe, running or exercising or meditation, or, maybe it's a combination of all those things.
Absolutely.
And I mean, there's people that are scared even of the word meditation. And it's because it's something that they don't fully understand.
That's all it is.
And, and you mentioned the word, it's like, we look at some of these things like they're very mystical, or they're anti-God, or, any of that. And I think we need to broaden our minds and open our minds that, again, we need possibly a tool belt full of things that we can deal with life with.
Oh, yeah.
Multiple, that toolbox full of different things and technique, because things change, as you get older. Again, a friend and I were talking last night, the stress and the things that he was dealing with and I was dealing with 10 years ago are completely different than they are now.
That's right.
It's like when we hear people talk about their testimony, a testimony, even if I gave you my testimony right now, it's from my perspective right now. And it's like I could name 5 things in my testimony that whatever, but understand 10 years ago, that testimony was completely different. Mm-hmm. And 10 years from now, it's going to be completely different. We look at almost like, you have this event, whatever it is, happening in your life, and that becomes our testimony. But life is not like that at all. Right. Life is multiple events.
Oh, yes.
Multiple. So I could say when my cousin killed himself, that was a very, it was a very big point in my life changing. And it's true, but 10 years ago, that wasn't. And I had another testimony. Mm-hmm. And I think where a lot of mistakes are being made with all of us is that we want to be preaching and like really teaching and preaching more than we are just telling our story. So like when in your particular case, when you're talking about the girl who called you, it's easy for me to like automatically want to hear, man, levitating and whatever, but that was her story. It doesn't matter if it happened exactly like she said.
Right.
That's what she believed and what happened. And
Right.
whether it happened exactly like she thought or not is honestly irrelevant. And I think we get stuck on those things. We like, well, she said she levitated, so she must be a wacko. Well, how about that's her story and period. And you start with the idea that that's her story.
Right.
And the same thing, it's like I've had friends who like really felt like, man, I went to the altar, I prayed, and it's like God spoke to me. Well, you can't refute somebody's testimony or somebody what happened to them, their experience. So I can say,
Right.
well, God's never done that to me, so you must be full of it. Or how about I start with your testimony and your belief and your thoughts, and we build from there. Too many times we want to fit them in our box. I still, again, mentioned this many times, but I think it's a great point is that like the thief on the cross comes to Jesus by saying, you remember me in your kingdom. That's all he says. That's all he says. And you think about that, like the guy's dying, Jesus is dying too. So he doesn't have a lot of information and it doesn't look very good, but that's all it takes. And sometimes we want to say, you got to do A, B, C, D, and E, even to get God's attention or get his salvation. And it's just not true.
Right.
It's just, I think God's so much bigger than that. And what we've done is we put him into a box. So when I hear about like the services you're talking about and the things that you are trying to do, what I hear is that this is another tool in the toolbox that I can actually, believe it or not, like I can completely relate to one of the things you're talking about is like I struggle staying still and being present and just being in that place where I'm not thinking about a million different things, where I'm not struggling to, think about the past, struggling not to think about the future, but just being, still.
Sure.
And the Bible like says that, be still. For I'm the Lord, in other words, that's Burroughs' paraphrase, but you get my point is like, it's like, be still. Why would it say be still? Because wait for what's going to happen. And I love that. In fact, man, I'm going to use this for like our nonprofit for suicide deal. It's like I always say, hey, the storm will be over. It's just a storm. It's just a time. So in other words, some people say wait till in the morning, but be still and wait on God before you make a drastic move, like kill yourself. You know what I'm saying? And I think that that's really what it's coming to is, but that's what you were, when you were talking about one of the things you do is like, they may just be there meditating, learning to meditate.
Right.
Well,
Right. Because meditation is such a broad term.
Oh, yeah.
There's walking meditation, there's active meditation, there's sitting meditation.
Absolutely.
Yes.
But you know what the truth, and I see that this is part of what you're trying to do too. It depends, obviously on the situation, but people, like I've read a lot of meditation books and part of them say, man, you may have to spend 2 minutes meditating at this point just to learn what that's like and learn. In other words, it's a growing, building muscle.
It's a practice.
Yes. And so, nobody who's never even thought about meditation or even prayer really is going to go and sit for an hour and do it.
Absolutely not.
It's going to be miserable.
I went to meditation boot camp, so I kind of have like a little bit of advantage. I lived at the Osage Forest of Peace in Sand Springs outside of Tulsa for about a half a year in 2019. And my life was centered around meditating 3 times a day for 20 minutes, eating healthy, and tending to herb gardens and being in nature.
Yeah.
It's one of 2 places in the world where Christians, specifically Catholics and Buddhist monks practice together.
Wow. Outside of Tulsa.
Yep. Sand Springs.
Wow.
If
I have to look that
anybody's
up.
looking for a retreat center, that's the spot.
All right. So tell people how they get in touch with you and how, if they're interested in finding out more information, how do they do that?
Sure. You can visit my website. It is www.compassionatesolutions.com. So Soulutions is spelled like soul, S-O-U-L, Soulutions.
Okay.
So you can look me up there, compassionatesolutions.com. You can shoot me a text or give me a call, leave a voicemail if I don't answer. My number is 580-660-0380. And so I do have some limited spaces right now, but I'm shifting into having more openings and really just looking forward to being a support to my peers.
Yeah. Well, great. I appreciate what you're doing and what you're trying to do. And thank you for being on the show, and hope you have a great day.
Thanks for
having me.
Thank you,
guys.
Thank you for listening to Positively Undefeated. If there was something in this show that resonated with you, please share the show with your community. If you want this show delivered each Monday morning to your podcast app of choice, please subscribe or follow. And if you'd like to get a hold of Burl, please do so by going to burlstricker.com/contact.